everyone! We're on to chapter 4 of Dealing with Dragons, in which Kazul has a dinner party and Cimorene makes dessert. Cimorene watched Therendale go with feelings of great relief. Now she had at least a month to find a permanent way of discouraging the knights, for she was quite certain that Therendale would spread news of her injury. She decided to put up her sign anyway, just in case, and after a little looking she found a scrubby tree beside the path and hung a sign on it. On her way back to Kazul's cave she noticed the two pieces of the ledge were still invisible, and she was very careful about crossing them. She looked down once out of curiosity and was immediately sorry. She was not comfortable with the sight of her own 2 feet planted firmly on nothing at all, with the sharp, spiky tops of spruce trees in full view some 50 feet below. Kazul arrived only a few minutes after Cimorene herself. Cimorene was looking for some thread to mend her skirts, which had gotten torn and stained while she was climbing along the ledge, when she heard the unmistakable sounds of a dragon sliding into the cave. "Cimorene!" Kazul's voice called. "Coming!" Cimorene called back, abandoning her search. She picked up her lamp and hurried out to greet Kazul. "I'm glad you're still here," Kazul said mildly, as Cimorene came into the large cave. "Morans was quite sure you'd run off with a knight or a wizard. I couldn't quite make out which for certain." "Is Morans the yellow-green dragon who wanted to eat me?" Cimorene asked. "Because if he is, he's just trying to make trouble." "I'm well aware of that," Kazul said with a sigh that sent burnt bread smell halfway through the cave. "But things would be easier for me if you didn't provide him with any material to make trouble." "Exactly what happened?" "Well, Morwen came this afternoon," Cimorene began, "and we were talking about all the interruptions I've been having, and she suggested putting out a sign." Cimorene explained why she had gone to put the sign up herself, and told Kazul in detail about her meeting with the wizard, the dragon, and the prince. "So Morwen was here," Kazul said, and sat back. The scales of her tail rattled comfortably against the floor. "That simplifies matters. Did you bring the sign back with you?" "No, I found a tree and hung it up on the path," Cimorene said, wondering what this was all about, "in case Therendale doesn't tell everyone about my anchor after all." "Better still," Kazul said, smiling fiercely, showing all of her teeth. "Morans is going to regret meddling." "Meddling in what?" "My business." "I'd like a little more of an explanation than that, if you don't mind giving one," Cimorene said, with a touch of exasperation. Kazul looked startled, then thoughtful, and then she nodded. "I keep forgetting you're not an empty-headed princess like most. Sit down and make yourself comfortable. This may take a while." Cimorene found a rock and sat on it. Kazul settled in a more restful position and folded her wings neatly along her back and began. "It has to do with status. Dragons aren't required to have princesses, you see. Most of us don't. There are never enough to go around, and some of us prefer not to have to deal with the annoyances that come with them." "The knights," Cimorene guessed. "Among other things," Kazul said, nodding. "So having a princess in residence has become a minor mark of high status with the dragons." "A minor mark?" Kazul smiled. "I'm afraid so. It's the equivalent of, serving an expensive and imported fruit at dinner. It's a nice way of showing everyone how rich you are, but you could make just as big an impression by having one of those fancy parties with the smooth glazed icing and sugar-spun roses." "I see." Cimorene did see, though she found herself wishing Kazul had found something else to compare it to. Talk of dinner reminded her too much of Moran's repeated desire to eat her. "Morans is young and not very bright, I'm afraid," Kazul said, almost as if she had read Cimorene's mind. He seems to have the mistaken impression that if a princess behaves badly it reflects on the dragon who captured her. Possibly it comes from his inability to keep any of his own princesses for more than a week. Some of the lesser dragons were very snide about it, when he lost the 3rd one in a row. I believe she sneaked out while he was napping." "I don't see how he can blame his princess," Cimorene objected. "I mean, if most princesses are unwilling, it must be fairly usual for them to try to get away." "Of course, but Morans doesn't see it that way. He's been trying to catch someone else's princess in similar foolishness for years, and he's quite certain he's finally done so. He's undoubtedly spreading the story of your escape far and wide at this very moment." "Oh dear," said Cimorene. Kazul smiled again, her teeth glittered silver in the lamplight. "He'll look extremely foolish when it becomes obvious you're still here. Which is one of the reasons I've asked a few of my friends to dinner tonight." "You've what?" Cimorene said, and all of her worries about Morans were instantly replaced by worries about fixing a dinner on short notice for an unknown number of dragons. "How many? What time will they be here? Where are we going to put them all?" "Six, around 8:30, in the banquet cave. And you won't be doing anything but dessert. I've already arranged the rest of the meal." "Arranged? With whom?" "Ballamore the giantess. She's loaned me the Cauldron of Plenty that she uses when her 12-headed son-in-law drops in for dinner unannounced. It'll handle most things, but all it can produce in the way of dessert is a burnt mint custard and sour cream and onion ice cream." "Ugh," said Cimorene. "I see your problem." "Exactly. Can you manage?" "Not if you want Cherry's Jubilee. I haven't got a pot large enough to make seven dragons worth of Cherry's Jubilee." "Would chocolate mousse do? I can make 2 or 3 batches, and there should be time for all of them to chill if you're not starting till 8:30. "Chocolate mousse will be fine," Kazul assured her. "Come along and I'll show you where to bring it." Cimorene picked up the lamp and followed Kazul into the public tunnels that surrounded Kazul's private caves. She was a little surprised, but when she saw the size of the banquet cave, she understood. It was enormous. 50 or 60 dragons, perhaps even 100 of them, could fit quite comfortably inside. Obviously, it had to be a public room. There simply wasn't enough space under the mountains of mourning for every dragon to have a cave this size. Kazul made sure that Cimorene could find her way to the banquet cave without help, and left her to the kitchens to melt slabs of chocolate and whip gallons of cream for the mousse. By the time she finished she was hot and tired, and all she really wanted to do was take a nap. But Kazul was expecting her to serve the mousse, and Cimorene wasn't about to appear before all those dragons in her old clothes, with sweaty strangles of her hair sticking to her neck, and a smear of chocolate across her nose. So instead of napping, she pumped a cauldron of water, heated it on the kitchen fire, and took a bath. Once she felt clean, everything was much better. She checked to make sure the mousses were setting properly, and then went to her own room to decide what she should wear. Unfortunately, she was afraid she didn't have much choice. The wardrobe in her bedroom was full of neat, serviceable dresses, suitable for cooking or rummaging about treasure, but the only dressy clothes she had were the ones she arrived in. She'd gotten them out of the back of the wardrobe, and to her dismay found the hem of the gown was badly stained from the mud along her walk. There was no time to clean it. She would have to wear one of her everyday dresses. With a sigh, Cimorene turned back to the wardrobe and opened it once more to look for the nicest of the ordinary clothes. She gasped in surprise. The hangers were now full of the most beautiful gowns she had ever seen. Some were silk, some were velvet, some with heavy brocade, and others had layers of feather-like gauze. Even more still were embroidered with gold or silver. Some even had jewels sewn in. "Well, of course," Cimorene said out loud after a stunned moment. "Why would a dragon have an ordinary wardrobe? Of course it's magic. What's in it depends on what I'm looking for." One of the wardrobe's doors waggled slightly, and the hinges creaked in a smug agreement. Cimorene blinked at it. Then she shook herself and began looking through the gowns. She chose one of red velvet, heavily embroidered with gold, and found matching slippers in the bottom of the obliging wardrobe. She set her black hair back to hang loosely in waves, nearly to her feet, and even dug out a crown in the back of the drawer where she had stuffed it on her first night. She finished getting ready a few minutes early. Feeling very cheerful, she went into the kitchen to fetch the mousse. It took Cimorene 4 trips to get the mousse into the serving area just off the banquet cave, and a dragon-sized serving was little over a bucketful. She could barely manage to carry 2 at a time. With everything ready, she stood in the serving area and waited nervously for Kazul to ring for dessert. She could hear the muffled booming of dragons' voices through the heavy oak door, but could not make out what anyone was saying. The bell rang at last, summoning Cimorene to serve dessert. She carried the mousse into the banquet cavern, 2 servings at a time, and set it in front of Kazul and her guests. The dragons were crouched around a shoulder-high slab of white stone. Cimorene had to be very careful about lifting the moose up onto it. Fortunately, she didn't have to wonder which dragon to serve first. She could tell which dragons were most important from their places at the table, and she made a silent apology to her protocol teacher, who had insisted she learned about seating arrangements. Protocol had been one of the princess lessons that Cimorene had hated most. As she set the last serving in front of Kazul, one of the other dragons said in disgruntled and a vaguely familiar voice, "I see the rumors are wrong again, Kazul. Or did you have to go after her and haul her back the way the rest of us do?" Cimorene turned angrily, but before she could say anything, a large gray-green dragon on the other side of the stone slab said, "Nonsense, Warag! The girl's got more sense than that. You shouldn't listen to gossip. Next thing you know, you'll be chasing after the imaginary wizard Gerium's been on about." Cimorene recognized the speaker at once. He was Roxham, the elderly dragon she had given 4 of her handkerchiefs to. "I suppose it was that idiot Morans again trying to cause trouble," a purple-green dragon said, with bored distaste. "Someone ought to do something about him." "Kazul still hasn't answered my question," Warag said, and his tail lashed once like an angry cat. "I'd like her to do so if the rest of you are going to stop sidetracking the conversation." "Here now," Roxham said indignantly. "That's a bit strong, Warag. Too strong, if you ask me." "I didn't," Warag said. "I asked Kazul, and I'm still waiting." "I'm very pleased with my princess," Kazul said mildly. "And no, I didn't have to haul her back, as you would realize if you'd given the matter a little thought. Or does your princess normally leave 7 servings of chocolate mousse in the kitchen when she runs away?" "Hear, hear," said Roxham. Cimorene noted with interest that Warag's scales turned an even brighter shade of green than normal, and he was starting to smell faintly of brimstone. "One of these days you'll go too far, Kazul," he said. "You started it," Kazul pointed out, and she turned to the grey dragon. What's this about Gerium and the wizard, Roxham?" "You haven't heard?" Roxham said, sounding surprised. "Gerium's been raving about it for weeks. Somebody snuck into her cave and stole a book from her library. No traces, but for some reason she's positive it was a wizard." Roxham sneezed, emitting a small ball of flame that just missed hitting his bowl of mousse. "Gives me an allergy attack just thinking about it." "If it wasn't a wizard, who was it?" a dragon at the far end of the table asked. "Could have been anyone, an elf, a dwarf, even a human," Roxham responded. "No reason to think it was a wizard just because Gorium didn't catch him in the act." "Not with the amount of time she spends away from home." "Which book did she lose?" a thin, brown-greenish dragon said next to Kazul. "What does it matter?" a purple-green dragon muttered. "Some history or another, and that's the other thing. What would a wizard want with a history book? No, Gerium's making a lot of fuss over a common thief, that's what I say." "It could have been a wizard," said the dragon at the far end. "Who knows why they want the things they want?" "Ridiculous," Roxham replied with rigor. "A wizard wouldn't dare come through this part of the mountains. Now that they know what we do to 'em, by George! Begging pardon," he added to the silver-green dragon next to him, who appeared to have been rather shocked by his language. "I'm afraid you're wrong there," Kazul said. "Cimorene met one today, less than 2 miles from my cave." "What? What?" Roxham said. "You're sure?" "That's done it." The purple-green dragon rolled his head in an irritated gesture, so that his scales made a scratching noise as they rubbed together. "You'll never get him to quit talking about it now." "Quite sure," Cimorene assured Roxham, after glancing at Kazul to make sure she was expected to answer Roxham's question herself. "He made 2 bits of the ledge I was standing on turn invisible, so I would think it wasn't safe to keep going." "Certainly sounds like a wizard to me," a dragon piped up from the far end. "What did he look like?" the silver-green dragon asked. Cimorene described the wizard and as well as she could, and then added, "He said his name was Zeminar." "Zeminar! That's ridiculous," Warag snorted. "Zeminar was elected the head of the Society of Wizards last year. He wouldn't waste his time playing games with someone's princess." "Not unless he had a great deal to gain by it," the thin dragon said in a thoughtful tone. She turned her head and looked speculatively at Cimorene. "Such as," Warag said, and he waited a minute, and when no one answered, he continued, "No, I can't believe it was Zeminar. The girls made a mistake, that's all." "Perhaps it wasn't him," Cimorene said, holding on to her temper as hard as she could. "I've never met Zeminar, so I wouldn't know, but that's who he said he was." "Wouldn't it be amusing if she was right?" the purple-green dragon said, showing some interest in the proceedings for the first time. "I don't see that it matters," the silver-green dragon said. "The most important thing is that he was a wizard, poking around smack dab in the middle of our mountains. What are we going to do about it?" "Tell King Tokaz," Roxham said. "It's his job to handle this sort of thing, isn't it?" "What can Tokaz do about it?" Warag said, and there was a faint undercurrent of contempt in his tone. "He could use the king's crystal to find out what the wizards were really doing," the thin dragon said in a prim tone. "He won't use the crystal for anything less than a full-fledged war," said Warag. "And why should he? What could Tokaz even do if he did find something out about the wizards and preying on the poor defenseless dragons like Garium?" "Lodge a formal protest with the Society of Wizards," Roxham answered promptly, ignoring Warag's sarcasm. "Proper thing to do, no question. Then next time anyone sees a wizard—" His voice trailed off, and he snapped his teeth together, suggestively. "He probably would just set up a committee," the purple-green dragon said. "Can't anyone think of something else?" I don't think we should do anything until we have some idea what Zeminar was after," the thin dragon said. "It could be important." "We have to do something," the silver dragon said. Her claws clashed against the stone table. "We can't have wizards wandering in and out as they please. Why, we'd lose half our magic in no time. Not to mention everyone sneezing themselves silly every time one of those drafted staffs gets too close," the dragon at the far end added. The dragons began arguing among themselves about what to do and how best to do it, and it reminded Cimorene of the way her father's ministers argued. Everyone seemed to agree something ought to be done about the wizards, but they each had a different idea about what was appropriate. Roxham insisted huffily that the only thing to do was inform the king, who would make a formal protest. The thin dragon wanted to find out what the wizards were up to. She didn't say how this was to be done, and before anyone tried to chase them off. The silver-green dragon wanted to send patrols out immediately and eat any wizard who ventured into the Mountains of Mourning. The dragons at the far end of the table wanted to attack the headquarters of the Society of Wizards the following morning, and the purple-green dragon thought it would be most entertaining to wait and see what the wizards did next. Warag was the only one of the guests who did not have a proposal, though he made occasional comments, usually sarcastic ones, about everyone else's suggestions. Kazul did not say anything at all. Cimorene was at first surprised and then puzzled by her silence, since Kazul was the one who had set the whole discussion going to begin with. As the argument grew more and more heated, however, Cimorene began to be glad that there was at least one dragon present who was not involved in it. The dragon at the far end of the table was starting to breathe little tongues of fire at the purple-green dragon, and Roxham was threatening loudly to have another allergy attack. But Cimorene was fairly sure that Kazul would stop the discussion before things got completely out of hand. And she was right. A moment later, while the dragon at the far end was taking a deep breath to continue arguing, and the thin dragon was winding up to a long, involved train of logical reasons why her proposal was best, Kazul said, "Thank you all for your advice. I'll certainly think about it before I decide what to do." "What do you mean by that?" the thin dragon said suspiciously. "It was my princess who met the wizard," Gazul pointed out. "Therefore it's my decision whether to report the matter to the king, or take some action on my own, or to ask for cooperation from any of you." None of the other dragons appeared to like hearing this, but to Cimorene's surprise, none of them gave Kazul any argument about it. The dragon at the far end of the table made a few half-hearted grumbles, but that was all, and the conversation turned to the intricacies of several draconian romances that were currently in progress. As soon as her guest appeared to have calmed down, Kazul gave the signal for an empty moose dishes to be taken away, so that Cimorene only heard a few incomprehensible snatches of the new conversation. She didn't really mind. She had plenty to think about already. And that's the end of chapter 4. Next time we'll read chapter 5, in which Cimorene receives a formal call from her companions in dire captivity. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I will see you next time for another story, and until then, stay happy and stay safe. Goodbye, guys.